Hey, you guys, thanks for tuning in for another exciting episode of Prep Talk Radio with Scott and Shane and Paris. And you'll notice Shane is not on screen for those of you on the YouTube. Shane had a family commitment he had to take care of. And we've got a special guest today, Jordan Gundersen, who's an herbalist. Before we get into that, it's going to be a fun episode. I've actually been waiting for this. Before we get into that, I want to remind you guys, go hit over on our YouTube and make sure you're following Prepper Talk Radio there. We are doing a giveaway where 5 ounces of silver is going to be not raffled off. It's just going to be given away. Here's the thing. If you want in on that, you've got to follow us on YouTube and kick us a join, I guess you'd say, in our Facebook group, Emergency Prep and Self-Reliance, where we do a lot of stuff in there as well. But make sure you're following us there in both those locations, and you'll be included in the drawing as soon as we break 1,000 followers on YouTube, which is really getting close finally. But without further ado, let's jump into it. Jordan, thanks for being with us tonight. Appreciate you taking the time out.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, guys. I really appreciate it.
So tell us how you got into becoming an herbalist. I mean, it's not, most people are like, oh, medicine, and they go towards all these pharmaceuticals, and that's not real medicine, right? That's not real solutions. I mean, sometimes it is, I guess, but for the most part, it's not what God intended. But how did you go this path of becoming an herbalist?
So I think for most people, they don't really have a passion for something until it really affects them, in some kind of personal way. And throughout my life, herbal medicine was never on my radar at all. I wasn't far from that. That just had no interest to me. I grew up in a family that was a little more naturally minded, or I'd maybe call it more alternative health minded, not necessarily naturally minded. We tried to eat pretty healthy when I was growing up. But it wasn't until, I was in my first full-time job. My wife actually had a lot of health problems from growing up, and she was able to reverse a lot of her health issues just by changing her diet. And we had started a business with that, and she was coaching a lot of people with their diet. And then it felt like something was missing in our business. It felt like there was something we needed to have as well. And I had thought about going and getting some kind of degree in herbal medicine, in herbology. And then I was kind of dragging my feet a little bit. And then it's those times that I feel like God has to give you a kick in the pants to get you to move in a direction. So I broke my toe. I shattered it, my right big toe. I was helping somebody move some tables, and I dropped one just square on the toe.
Oh, man.
It was so painful.
Ouch.
And at the time, we had just been starting our own business. We didn't have health insurance. And we were like, what are we going to do? We don't have the money to pay for this right now. And it's going to require surgery to get it all put back together. But we had some friends who knew about herbs. One was an herbalist. And so we consulted with her. We said, hey, what do we do? How can we fix this? Is there anything we can do? We didn't really know. I mean, we knew a little bit about things, but not enough to know what to do in this kind of situation. And so for me, that became a big area where I was like, this is a huge blind spot for me. I don't know what to do. Like, we've been trying to live in a natural way, but I don't know what to do. Like, if this happens to my kid. And so we started.
Or if it happens to you.
Right.
Because it did.
It did happen to me.
Quick question. So it was shattered. Was like, the normal doctor would say, okay, we need to have some reconstruction probably.
Yep. Right? You probably need to put some rods in, some kind of pins.
Yeah.
I didn't get an x-ray just because that was going to cost a lot of money too, that we didn't have at the time. And so I went to a friend who was a chiropractor, and he did an ultrasound, and there were several places that were really bad. And I couldn't even put any kind of weight on it. Even just moving it, not even having any kind of weight, was horrible. Like a sock was unbearable.
Oh man.
So it was pretty bad.
So it was legit. You got an ultrasound to prove it.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was pretty bad. And then this friend of ours told us that we should start using an herb called comfrey. And comfrey, the botanical name, is called Symphytum officinale. And symphytum means to knit flesh together. And officinale means that it was used as official medicine. So here we have this herb that's called official medicine to knit flesh together. And there's a compound in comfrey called allantoin, which is a cell proliferating compound. And that's kind of what it does. That's what it's been used for a long time, to knit flesh together, bones together. And so we started using that on my toe externally, and I took it internally. And within 4 weeks, I could put weight on my foot again, and I could walk around, and I didn't have to use a boot. And now I have complete full range motion of my toe. I can put all kinds of weight on it. I can jump on it. It's like it never happened. The toenail did come off, and that took a long time to grow back, but that's kind of how it goes with toenails.
So have you had an X-ray or ultrasound since to see if there's see what it actually did to heal it?
I haven't. That's a good idea. It just never occurred to me to do that, because I thought, hey, it worked. It's fine. It doesn't look weird. So
that's a big test. Is like, what's the function? Is it functioning again normally? That's, I think, a bigger, better test.
Mm-hmm.
Why pay money to go have somebody else look at it and tell you, yeah, your assessment is correct?
Did you do any like first aid setting it, like put braces next to it, like wrap it at all? Did you do anything like that to kind of help the bones knit together properly? Because when things are knitting together, I'm not very good at sewing, but when I sew things, it doesn't look like as good as when my wife sews things, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
She knows how to line up the fabric a lot better than I do, if you know what I mean. So
yeah.
Did the comfrey line up your, so to speak? I'm just curious if the comfrey knew how to line up your bones properly to get it so that it was right. Otherwise, you might have some little, little bone sticking out, whatever, bone spur, some kind of a thing,
So here's my answer to that. I'm a little bit a mix between the folk medicine and the scientific part about herbs. So this is my belief. Comfrey root, the root in particular of comfrey, what's interesting about it is that when you want to create a new comfrey plant, you actually get cuttings of the root, and you can just throw it in the ground, cover it up, and what it will do is it will right itself the way that it needs to be and then start growing.
Oh, wow.
And so I look at that and go, that's probably what it's doing in the body as well. And for me, when I broke my toe, there was a little piece of bone that I could feel. It was like sticking out of the side, and it was so painful. But once it started to heal, it's almost like that piece kind of came back in, and it's not deformed or anything. It doesn't look weird. It did before, and I could feel it, and it was, oh man, it was so painful. Just thinking about it brings back the memory of how bad it was. But yeah, I don't have that same kind of issue. There's not that bone sticking out like there was. So in my mind, in my estimation, it's kind of gone back. But that would be interesting to have an X-ray to confirm that, even if it is, I don't want to spend tons of money doing that. But
sure. So after that experience, where you're like, all right, I need to learn more. I want to get certified or verified or whatever. Is that kind of what the catalyst was to get you to finally jump in and get your herbologist title?
Almost. I was a little bit stubborn. I was like, oh, this is kind of girly. This is feminine, learning about herbs and plants. And I think God was like, okay, you need a little bit more. Let's open up the floodgates. So that happened in June. when I broke my toe. And
Mhm.
then a few months later, after it had, healed back up and things were good, I got meningitis. It wasn't
Oh,
from the
geez.
toe. It was from something else. But we didn't go get that diagnosed. I shouldn't say I had meningitis. I should say I believe that I had meningitis because checked all the boxes. The only way you can get diagnosed with meningitis is if you go to the hospital. They give you a spinal tap, and I am so bad with needles. I've passed out multiple
Well,
times
that's one of the most
needles.
uncomfortable things. Like that's to have a spinal tap that's severe, right?
Yeah,
That's a lot of
right.
trauma on the body. So for those that are like, well, what the heck is meningitis? It's basically it's the inflammation, the swelling on the membranes covering the brain and the spinal cord, right?
Yep.
And
So
is it bacterial or I can't remember if it's bacterial.
there's both. There's
Oh,
bacterial
really?
meningitis and viral meningitis.
That
Uh,
sucks.
I believe I had viral meningitis, and the way that you help it is essentially the same. Um, but it was probably one of the most scary things that I've ever had happen to
Okay.
me.
Mhm.
I could feel my neck just started to close off. I couldn't swallow my own saliva, and I was really starting to lose it mentally. And that's one
Mhm.
of the things with meningitis is that you you just start to go insane and you think that you're going to die. And so most people who die from meningitis, it's not necessarily because the physical symptoms are so bad, it's because of the mental aspect of it. So that started to be really big. We reached out to our herbalist friend again, and she was like, going to the hospital right now. And so we were like, well, that's not really an option for us. I know you're required to say that, but we're going to try things a little bit differently. So I started using Lobelia, and we started using garlic in very high quantities. And we also used a prayer of faith. I'm a big believer in that. And it was about within 24 hours after doing all those things, I was able to swallow my own saliva again, and it
Mhm.
started to subside and go away. I went from being in a bed, not being able to move, to back on my feet in 24 hours. And it was at that point I was like, I have to know more. I need to
Mm.
know what to do in case something like this happens again. So I'm not trying to, piece together things that I've read or I've talked about with other people. I need to know for myself. So it was after that that I went back to the School of Natural Healing, which is in Springville, Utah, and I did their herbalist program.
And
So
that's with Dr. Christopher, right?
Correct.
So his herbs are all over Amazon. I actually have a stash in my 90-day pantry. I have a few things in there, and I've been told by several people that are in the natural healing, arts and whatnot, that Dr. Christopher is like one of the bomb guys to get his mixtures and his stuff. And so I've actually used some of his stuff for stress relief, and then also for other things that my family has. And I have an appreciation for Dr. Christopher's product. So that's cool that you went to, he's well known. So
Yeah.
that's a good thing. So when you present your skills, you can say, look, I was trained by the School of Natural Medicine, Dr. Christopher's school. So that's really good credibility.
Yeah, I can vouch for their quality too. As part of the school, we went and toured the facility where they have all their herbs made, and
mhm.
it's high quality stuff. It's really good. I've had several experiences with other kinds of herbs that were not as high quality. I didn't know that at the time because they say, "Oh yeah, we're high quality," and they just weren't.
So
And
let me go back a second. So you said you use lobelia and
mhm,
garlic.
yeah,
What were the factors, I mean, that came from those? Like what do those do combined? Or how did it really help? Because
sure.
that's where I'm like, I need to know. I want to understand that.
Right. So I used lobelia. That was kind of we made a tea out of lobelia. Lobelia is a wonderful herb. It has a long history here in the state of Utah, where I am. actually. A lot of the early Mormon pioneers were trained as herbal doctors. People like Willard Richards, his brother Levi Richards, and then a man by the name of Pretty Meeks. They were kind of some of the top herbal doctors at the time when the Mormon Saints came out to Utah.
Okay.
And Lobelia was one of the primary herbs that they used. And Lobelia is a little blue flower that grows, and it's used it has a multitude of uses, but one of its main uses is kind of as like a nerve relaxant. But the way that Lobelia works is it works to help remove any kind of obstruction in the body. And a lot of herbalists will say that Lobelia is a thinking herb, or that it's a smart herb. It will go wherever the body needs it and work in that area. One of the
blood clots, maybe?
Yeah, kind of like that.
Oh, wow.
One of the most common things, like if you go look up Lobelia online, you'll find that people say that it's an emetic. It'll make you throw up. In my experience, that's not always the case, because I believe Lobelia is smart. It'll do what the body needs. So, for example, there have been a few times where somebody in my house has been sick, and we want to make them throw up to get rid of it, because that's a good way to help the body cleanse the system. Lobelia in particular, it's going to make you throw up and make you feel really good afterwards, not like make you sick kind of throw up.
Gotcha.
Huh.
So my wife, we started giving her some Lobelia. We started administering it in such a way that would produce that kind of an effect, but she didn't throw up. And it was very baffling because, they say, give this much of Lobelia and they should start vomiting. And that wasn't the case. For her, it actually went the other way. But for me, I can take a little bit and then start to feel like I'm going to toss my lunch. So
Interesting.
Yeah, it's a very interesting herb. And so for me, when I took that Lobelia when I was sick, it started to work on my nervous system, on my spinal cord, and in my head. And that was kind of the thinking there. And then with the garlic is actually one of the most antiviral and antibacterial compounds on the planet.
I hear it's also anti-vampiric.
Yes, very much so.
Good. So if you have any trouble with vampires, you can use garlic and take care.
Paris,
Okay, all right.
We're also focused on that. We're not worried about the apocalypse anymore. We're worried about
vampires. Well, zombies and vampires.
You never know these days.
Yeah, zombie apocalypse, vampire apocalypse. All right. Go back to.
Well, so I pulled it up, and this is fascinating because, like right now, I've got a sore throat. I've got a cough. Just hit yesterday, and I'm like, really? So I'm taking my elderberry, but I'm looking at this. I'm like, I should be taking this, because it says right here, it's like, I've got asthma. It helps treat asthma, whooping cough, also induce vomiting. Helps with insect bites, worms, croup, epilepsy. I'm like, what? Epilepsy, sprains, felons, ringworm, and it goes on. And poison ivy, irritation, So basically, when you say it's a smart herb, to me, that's like, so many people are like, oh yeah, I need to get some smart nanotech infused into my body or this and that, and it's like, dude, God already made that.
Exactly.
It's like you just need to know what it is and be able to know where to use it. This works in a number of different ways and helps to fix a number of different problems. And what are the side effects? Maybe puking or pooping a little faster?
Right. And that's an interesting story because Lobelia has a controversial history. The man that Willard Richards and Pretty Meeks and Levi Richards that they learned from, his name was Samuel Thompson. He was around, the mid 1800s was when he started this form of medicine he called Thompsonian medicine. It was just using herbs, but it was kind of a system of using herbs. Okay. And the mainstream medical doctors at the time tried to get him thrown in jail. And they tried to say that he was trying to kill people with this plant called Lobelia. And so they brought this guy in that he had apparently tried to kill to get him to testify against Samuel Thompson. And the man was like, yeah, he gave me this herb and it made me throw up. And the court was like, oh, well, was he trying to kill you? And he was like, no, I feel the best I've ever felt since he did that. And so they were like, oh, they couldn't get him on the Lobelia. And even in the modern day, the FDA tried to extract the active compound out of Lobelia called lobeline, and they injected it into rats to try to kill them. But they found that they had to inject like crazy amounts of this compound to actually do the trick. And so, yeah, lobelia is a great herb. When used with skill, it can be used to help harmonize the actions of other herbs together. And so in a lot of Dr. Christopher's formulas, you'll find lobelia in a very small amount because it helps to get everything to work together and then go where it needs to in the body.
That's really interesting.
That is cool.
Wow.
So,
Thank you.
So you mentioned that you took a large doses of garlic. One of the things that I think that a lot of people are nervous about, and of course, anybody who has any history of, painkillers or medicines, they tell you, you could overdose, and it'll hurt you. So tell us a little bit about, can you overdose on herbs? I mean, and if you, I know that you can overdose on water. I mean, you can drink too much water and it can be bad for you, but the amount of water you have to drink to overdose is almost impossible to reach. So is that kind of how it is with herbs too, a little bit?
Yeah, it's a little bit the same. I mean, there are some herbs that are a little more mild than others. Most of the herbs that are available on the market today are pretty mild. You're not going to be able to get an herb that's super powerful. For example, there's an herb called foxglove. And they've extracted the active compound from foxglove to create digitalis for the heart. That's a medicine that's come from the herb foxglove, but you can't get foxglove commercially available because it's really powerful and you have to know what you're doing in order to use it. So the herbs that are on the market today, you're really not going to have an adverse reaction unless you're on some kind of medication, blood thinners, and any kind of medication that affects the brain. Those are two medications you want to think about before you're using some kind of herb and really know what you're doing. If you do start to have a side effect, there's a question that you should ask yourself. You should say, okay, is this a cleansing effect that I'm experiencing right now, or is this a side effect? And that will kind of be determined by, your health history. What kind of problems have you had in the past? Take asthma, for example. If you're using lobelia to help with asthma, you might start coughing up some kind of mucus. And if you do, if it were me, I'd be like, okay, this is probably a cleansing effect of taking the lobelia, because I've read about that. I've read about people who've used lobelia and then they just cough up like this black phlegm as part of that cleansing process. And that's necessary to remove the cause of why, you have the asthma.
Wow. So what are some of the other, I mean, you told us about a broken toe fixed by herbs. And by the way, just as a disclaimer, we don't necessarily recommend this unless you have the crazy, you're just crazy enough to try it. But use herbs and get comfortable with them. There's a scripture that I know about in a book of scripture that talks about how important it is that how God did give herbs to the people to allow them. There were people that were dying off based on certain things, but because of the herbs and the plants that were given to them, they were able to help people and heal people. And I believe it's God's medicine for sure. So you healed a broken toe. I mean, these are not approved by the FDA, right? These comments are not approved by the FDA. You healed a broken toe. You basically healed meningitis. And you've talked a little bit about how your wife was taken care of, and it went the opposite direction, of course. But what are some other things that you've noticed? And I know I'm excited actually to get to, and we don't have to get to it just yet, but I'm excited to get to what you did when you got COVID and how you invented a new, I think it's pretty cool, herbal mectin. I want to get to that eventually, but so we don't have to right now. But what else have you done? Just to kind of give people the idea of the range of what herbs can really do. So, I mean, you started off pretty strong. So,
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
what else?
So, yeah, I think there's a good thing for me to plug in there, that I'm not in the business of giving medical advice. If you need medical expertise, go see your doctor. I'm just here to provide you some good information based on my own experience. I can tell you about the things that I've done for me. If that works for you, that may or may not be true, but I believe it will, because I believe that God created these things, like you said.
Yep.
But yeah, we've had a lot of good stories of using herbs. I think we've gone so far down this rabbit hole of using herbs for our health, that I really believe that it's for everybody. Everybody should at least give it a try and start experimenting with things, start learning about herbs. But
All right. So
just to,
where would I go? Like, just to follow up on that before you move on to what you were going to say,
yeah.
if I'm just brand new starting out and I have no clue about herbs, where do I go? What would I do to kind of, is there a book like the Bible for herbologists or herbology or something like that you can start to read through and say, this particular herb looks like this. So if you find it in your backyard, this is what it is. Don't throw it away or pesticide it. Use it for medicinal purposes. And this is the different things that it could be used for. Is there a book that's out there that you recommend, or a series of books?
Yeah, there's several good books. I think a really good primer is one that I read in my school. What is it called? It's by Dr. Christopher. It's called Herbal Home Healthcare. That's a really good general book to start your health, your kind of natural health care at home. There's also another good one called Green Pharmacy by James Duke. And that one's a good, like, if you're new to herbs, that's a really good primer for what kind of herbs to use in what situations, and probably some herbs that you have already at home. A lot of culinary herbs have medicinal value as well. Take thyme, for example. A lot of people will cook their food with thyme, and thyme is a specific for the thymus, which is one of your master glands in your immune system. So rosemary is a really common herb. Rosemary can be used for the brain specifically. It's really good for improving memory, concentration. There's studies to back that up as well, that say, hey, rosemary does a lot of good for the brain. So even just things like that, there's things that you probably have in your kitchen that are just really good general uses as well.
Do these books then teach you how to kind of mix them up, make a tea out of them, or make some kind of tincture, or make some kind of anything like that? Do they teach you how to do that stuff too, in case you?
Yeah, they do.
That's cool.
Both of them.
All right, back to what you were going to tell us about some of the things you've done. Unless Scott has a question.
Well, yeah, I wanted to get into the things you've done, but let's lead on in this way. Your website, which for those of you guys just kind of tuning in right now, Jordan Gundersen, thank you, Paris, put it up, .com. I love that you're just on the homepage right there, faith, family, freedom, right? Our platform, we're all about God, family, country. It's the same thing, right? Faith, family, freedom. But getting into all of this, becoming an herbalist, learning to fix things as you go, learning how these plants can be used to benefit you, got you to herbal mectin. But I want to, if people want to find ways to get in touch with you and connect with you, there's obviously they can get on your website and connect there. Jordan Gundersen, GUNDERSEN.com. But is there other places that you can follow you or stay connected?
Yeah, the best place is probably actually healthsaves.org. This is my personal website. I actually haven't updated it in quite a while, but healthsaves.org is where we're kind of focusing our efforts. We've
Okay.
got a newsletter that goes out every week. We're doing webinars on there as well.
It's up
And
on the screen now too, by the way.
yeah.
So this Health Saves is yours, is your company, or is it
Yes.
your,
Mhm.
okay.
Yeah, that's ours.
And so you have webinars that you do. Looks like you have
Mhm.
education tab, services.
Yeah.
So let's jump, obviously you've now done this as a career. Health Saves. What is your product? What is your service? What do you?
So we do a multitude of different things. My wife's a PhD nutritionist,
Oh,
and
wow.
so we help people change their diet and their lifestyle to help reverse, health problems that they have. My wife had all kinds of health problems when she was younger, and like I mentioned earlier, she was able to kind of reverse a lot of those just with diet. And then we kind of added in the herbs to help with that. After, obviously I had some uh, experiences that kind of humbled me to get me to that point. But we've been able to use herbs to help with some of those issues that she's had, but also help coach and teach people how to do that themselves as well. So we do health coaching, we do um, herbal consultations, we do. I'm also what you call an iridologist, which is where you look at the iris, and in the iris you can see certain genetic weaknesses in areas, as well as things that may have accumulated over time. So for me, for example, I've got a liver weakness and kidney weakness that I've acquired throughout my life. The kidney weakness probably came from not drinking enough water when I was young. And the liver weakness, I'm not sure where that came from, but that is something that I struggle with. And I've been working to get rid of, and we're just about there all the way. So those are some of the things that we've been able to do for ourselves. But we've also worked with a number of clients. One interesting thing that we seem to deal with a lot is people come to us with these health problems, and so we put them on our program to help reverse some of their issues, just mostly with diet. But one of the common things that people seem to come with us with is they've had their gallbladder removed, and they're like, hey, I've got these problems, what do I do? And one of the interesting things about the gallbladder is we found that people who've had their gallbladder removed, they really struggle with eating fatty foods, whether that's plant-based or animal-based, any kind of fat in general. And so
Right.
we kind of put them on a fruit high carb diet, and they just thrive.
Hmm.
There was this one person who came to us that had gallstones, and she called us like in a panic and was like, help, what do I do? And we're like, well, you should listen to your doctor, but if I were you, this is what I would do. And
Wink, hint, hint, wink, wink.
and
Nudge, nudge.
Dr. Christopher's liver and gallbladder actually is what we ended up saying that we would use. And she came back to us in like a couple weeks. She had like 15 gallstones, she said, and she told us that they were all gone. And
Wow.
so,
Because my wife was told that she has gallstones, and so that hit home right there for me. Because she has every once in a while something will happen where she'll eat something and it just sends her into nauseous panic, which increases anxiety. And
yeah,
she just, matter of fact, yesterday she had an episode where she was just nauseous, throwing up, and that led to anxiety. And a lot of it, she feels like, is her stomach just gets knotted up, and that the gallbladder, she feels like, as she's kind of getting in tune, she has a real sensitivity to what causes things. It's kind of cool. She'll say, I ate that, and that's what did it. And then
mm,
will either stop eating that or we won't eat that the same way again, so that we'll
yeah,
know. But she's been right on with that. And so it'd be cool to kind of combine what she's got as a natural kind of a sensitivity to herself and her own body with some of these things that you're sharing, and see if there's a way to kind of even improve it from there. So I'll be reaching out to you for sure after this about some of that for real. So that's cool. What else? What are some of the other cool experiences or people that you've helped, or some of the stories that you have that you can share?
This is the first one that comes to mind, and I think this is actually relevant to your audience as well, because it has a lot of practical application.
Mhm.
Before, I had gotten into herbs, my wife and I were kind of learning about things, and we were trying to educate ourselves. My wife was with our son, and they were at an orchard, and he was playing. He was about 2 years old at the time. He was playing around, and he got stung by a bee on his hand. And his hand started to swell up, and his face started to get kind of puffy as well. And she was like, "Oh no, he's having a reaction to the bee sting."
Mm-hmm.
And so she knew at the time that plantain, it's like a little weed
Yep.
that grows. She picked some, chewed it up, put it right on the spot, and then she had him chew some, and within 1 to 2 minutes, it was gone. It was completely gone.
Yeah.
Wow.
Plantain is one of those things that just it baffles me because it's everywhere in Utah, at least
Yeah,
it's everywhere. But I remember seeing it in Arizona, in California, and it's just there. It's just
So
easy to
why
find.
did plantain do that?
so plantain is what we call an alterative, which means that it alters the bloodstream. It helps to clean out the bloodstream. It is also what we call a drawing herb, so it will draw out toxins. So it's particularly useful for things like snake bites, dog bites, bee stings, spider bites, any kind of like infection or things like that. It's been used to help either draw it out or to clean it up. And so that's
Oh,
something that you can have, just in your yard. You probably have some growing.
so if I
And
get a cut and the cut gets infected, I mean, it could be a couple of days, weeks later, it can get infected, whatever. And maybe not weeks, but a couple of days later, it gets infected. I could still use the plantain to help that infection.
yeah, what I would do is I'd probably make a tea out of it, drink it internally, and then I'd also get some of the bruised herb. So I'd pick it and bruise it up and then put it right on the spot. And I do that for a few days, and it'd most likely
So
be good.
when you're making a tea, like, do you have to dry it out first? Like, what's the process before you can make it a tea?
So to make a tea, if you use the fresh herb, it's going to be stronger. It's going to be a lot more potent.
Okay.
Um, if you use the dried herb, it's still going to be good, but it's going to be a little less potent. So generally speaking, when you're making a tea, you'll want to use about 1 teaspoon of the herb per cup of boiling water. And if you can, you'll want to use distilled water. And the reason for that is it helps to draw out the medicinal compounds of the plant, whatever plant it is that you're using, a lot better than something like tap water, or really any other kind of water, because distilled water is highly polar. So it wants to make those chemical bonds. And so it'll pull those phytochemicals out
Really
of the plant. Yeah.
interesting.
I've heard
All
that
right.
distilled water with like baking soda and sea salt. There's a mixture there that you can make and drink, and it's like a cleanse. It like pulls out
Mm,
toxins in the body. So that kind of goes along with what you're saying. That's pretty
yeah.
cool. That's really awesome. So let's say, for example, one of the things that we are going to do once we hit 1,000 subscribers on our YouTube channel, by the way, everybody, please go over to YouTube and click the subscribe button, is that we're going to give away a Jase case as well. Scott mentioned the 5 ounces of silver earlier, but we also have a Jase case, which is an antibiotic supply from a pharmaceutical situation. So if I was to say, this company that created Jase Medical is a doctor, and he chose 5 for the person who fills out the question and doesn't have any allergies or whatnot. They get 5 different medicines, different antibiotics that will cover most of the things that you'll ever have to run into. And if you get, and it's usually within a year, they call it a year supply for the most things. So if I was to say, what would we do for herbs? Is there like a set of 5 to 10 herbs that everybody should have in their house that can kind of be mixed and mingled and or used for most of everything? Is there a list like that that's like, look, just make sure you have at a minimum in your supply have these 5 herbs or these 10 herbs or whatever the number is. Is there something like that you've found that is true?
Yeah, absolutely. Number one, I would say have some cayenne pepper on hand. Cayenne pepper is one of the best herbs that you can get. It's medicinal and it's nutritional.
Oh, tell us that story. Tell us the story. The story you told me on the story you told me on the phone the other day about the guy with the heart attack.
Oh yeah. So Dr. Christopher would use cayenne pepper for heart attacks. He taught that he never lost a heart attack patient when using cayenne. And what he would do is he would make a tea out of cayenne pepper, which is super hot, by the way. I don't know if anybody's ever tried that, but it is so hot because the hot water and the cayenne, wow, it's a trip. But what cayenne does is it helps to equalize the blood throughout the body. And it's also a specific food for the heart. It's really high in vitamin C. So Dr. Christopher would give his patients a cup of cayenne tea if they were experiencing a heart attack, and within 30 seconds, it would work every time. Now, I've seen that personally. I've seen somebody who's having a heart attack who's like, I need cayenne. And so they just took a bunch of capsules and hoping that that would do it. And I said, no, if you want to do it the way Dr. Christopher did it, you have to do the tea. And so they did the tea, and just like that, stopped it.
That
That's so
liquid
awesome.
suspension, the absorption rate's probably just off through the roof.
Yeah, exactly. That's why using a tea when you're using herbs is more preferred over like a capsule, because your body still has to break down the capsule. And that's, may take 20 minutes or more for it to get into your bloodstream. So cayenne, first and foremost, you should have some cayenne. It will stop bleeding externally. It will also stop bleeding internally. So when I broke my toe, blood was seeping out from under the toenail. And so there wasn't an abrasion that I could get to put cayenne on it directly. I tried to just like douse my toe in cayenne, but that didn't stop the bleeding. So I took cayenne tea internally, and then it was able to kind of normalize my blood, and it stopped the bleeding that way. So cayenne is number one. Number two, I would say have some comfrey on hand. Comfrey, like I already talked about, is huge, especially when there's things like cuts and, depending on the type of broken bone, you might be able to use it in the way that I did. But again, that kind of depends. But comfrey is one of those herbs that you want to have on hand as well. Another one that I would say would probably be some plantain. If you can, you may just keep it in your yard and don't spray it. That would be a good way to have, like a continual supply. If you can dry some, though, that will be good as well. Yarrow is another great herb to have on hand. Yarrow is a really great herb for fevers. I've used it a lot for things like fevers, but not in the way that most people would think. Most people, when somebody has a fever, they're like, oh, we need to get the fever to go down. Fever needs to go down. But instead, I take a different approach, and that's to work with the body rather than against it. And the body is trying to tell you that something's wrong inside. And so what it's trying to do is it's trying to cleanse, and it's trying to burn out whatever is inside you that's making you sick. And so it elevates the temperature. And so what I do is I use yarrow, because yarrow is a diaphoretic, which means it'll make you sweat. And so I'll drink a bunch of yarrow tea and keep raising that temperature, and then get in a hot bath, and then just induce that sweating to try and help get it out. And when I've done that, I've found that that speeds up the process rather than trying to take something that will, suppress the fever and just kind of mask the symptoms rather than getting to the underlying cause. So yarrow is really great for doing that. It will also, the leaves of yarrow will help arrest bleeding. It's what we call a hemostatic. And yarrow is another one that grows here in Utah in these mountains. you can find it all over. Another one in a similar vein to yarrow with the bleeding is called shepherd's purse. That one's a
Oh, yeah.
weed that grows like all over. You probably have some growing in your yard. Maybe not yet. If you're here in Utah, there's too much
I've
snow.
just got a yard full of snow still, so I'm
Yeah.
not going to see anything growing over here. I've got about 8 inches of snow to melt off. It's horrible. I hate snow.
Yeah.
I'm so done. I'm so done with the snow.
I know, me too.
Oh, awesome. So you gave us a good list. I'm sure you could keep going.
There's one more. There's one more I want to say.
Okay, give us one more.
Chaparral is another one that I think everybody should have on hand. Chaparral it grows in southern Utah, but it's a little more of a controversial herb. So maybe do your own research on that one.
Okay.
But up until the 80s, it was used for liver problems. They started doing research on cancer for it. I love Chaparral.
Awesome. Unfortunately, I've got to cut us off so we can jump into the live. But for those of you guys listening in, please make sure you listen to the next episode as well, because we're going to continue on in this and get into some of the other stuff. For example, herbal mectin that you came up with in our live. But I really, really want to thank you for being on with us this week for this and the next episode, because I think this is one of the biggest areas that people are kind of hung up on, or they've got a fear. It's one of those, fight, flight, or freeze. And a lot of people kind of freeze here. I know I have, because I'm like, oh, where do I start? Guys, this is a great way to start. Start here. Hit up Jordan. Listen to these 2 podcasts and stay connected with us, because it's just going to get more and more important to know these things, to know what medicine is versus what food is, right? Because these are foods at the end of the day, and what food can do for you, right, when used the correct way, and how healing it can be. Again, we're not doctors. We're not medical doctors. We're not giving medical advice, but pay attention to everything that Jordan's talking about and re-listen to this. Like, I'm writing notes, and I'm reaching for more paper to keep writing notes as we go. That's why I'm like looking down and looking over here, and I'm like typing it on my computer, and I'm like, oh, I gotta pull up a screen for that. Guys, just pay attention and stick with us, because you're going to get a lot out of this. You're a fantastic resource, Jordan. Thank you so much. But guys, stay tuned. Connect with us on the next episode, and we're going to come right back with Jordan, and we're going to get deeper into the world of herbalism. So thank you for tuning in this time, and we'll catch you guys on the next episode.